7 long years had passed. 7 years since he had practically walked out of Kemi's life. 7 years since he had stopped behaving like a husband. 7 years since he had stopped behaving like a father. Meanwhile, his relationship with Maribel continued to flourish. Or at least, that was what it looked like from the outside. Their son, Nolan, was now 7 years old. The little boy had become the center of Femi's world. Everything revolved around him. Everything. Since Nolan's birth, Maribel had conceived again. This time she gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Sophia. Sophia was now 4 years old. Ordinarily, the birth of another girl might have irritated the old Femi. Years earlier, the arrival of daughters had filled him with disappointment and resentment. But things were different now. He already had Nolan. He already believed he had the son he had always wanted. And as far as he was concerned, that was all that mattered. Maribel knew exactly how to keep Femi emotionally attached. She made sure that she and her children received the very best. The best clothes. The best schools. The best food. The best medical care. The best toys. The best everything. They lived in an elegant rented apartment in a choice neighborhood. Femi had purchased a vehicle for Maribel. There were frequent shopping sprees. Weekend outings. Birthday celebrations. Luxury purchases. Anything Maribel requested, Femi tried to provide. Looking at them from the outside, one would think they were the perfect family. But perfection often hides painful truths. While Maribel and her children enjoyed comfort, Kemi and her daughters struggled. Femi rarely called. Rarely visited. Rarely sent money. Sometimes months passed without any communication whatsoever. It was as though Kemi, Joy, Mitchel, and Sarah had ceased to exist. Far away from the drama consuming her father's life, Joy remained focused. University life suited her perfectly. The brilliance she had displayed in secondary school followed her into higher education. From her first year to her final year, Joy consistently ranked among the best students in her faculty. Lecturers admired her discipline. Classmates admired her intelligence. Many students sought her help whenever they struggled academically. She remained humble despite her achievements. And perhaps that humility made people admire her even more. Throughout university, she maintained her friendship with Bidemi. The friendship that had started in secondary school continued to grow stronger. The two young women became almost inseparable. They studied together, supported each other, encouraged each other, celebrated each other's successes, and stood together during difficult times. One afternoon, Bidemi arrived at Joy's hostel room. The two friends spent hours discussing assignments, examinations, future plans, and life in general. As they talked, Bidemi's phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "It's my mom," she answered immediately. The conversation lasted several minutes. Then Bidemi laughed. "Mommy, I'm with Joy." Apparently pleased by the information, Bidemi's mother requested to speak with Joy. Bidemi handed over the phone. "She wants to talk to you." Joy smiled and collected the phone. "Good afternoon, Ma." Immediately, the older woman began showering Joy with affection. She asked about her studies, her health, her plans after graduation. Then she thanked Joy once again for everything she had done for Bidemi over the years. "My daughter would not be where she is today without your help," the woman said warmly. "You have been a blessing to her." Joy smiled modestly. "You are too kind, Ma." "No," Bidemi's mother replied. "I mean every word." The conversation continued for several minutes. Then the woman suddenly said, "Actually, someone is here with me." Joy listened. "My son Albert." There was amusement in her voice. "He keeps hearing me mention your name." Joy laughed softly. Oh, yes, the woman continued. And since you are on the phone, let me allow both of you greet each other. A moment later, another voice came on the line. A calm male voice. Hello. Hello, Joy replied politely. My name is Albert. Nice to meet you. I'm Bidemi's elder brother. The conversation lasted barely 2 minutes. Simple greetings. Nothing more. Nothing less. Eventually they exchanged pleasantries and ended the call. To Joy, it seemed like a completely ordinary interaction. Just another casual conversation. Just another greeting. Nothing significant. At least, that was what she thought. Life continued moving forward. Months passed. Examinations came and went. Academic sessions ended and new ones began. Then one day, Albert came to visit Bidemi at the university. By then, Bidemi had spoken so much about Joy that Albert felt as though he already knew her. Albert was a pharmacist working for a reputable pharmaceutical company. At 30 years old, he was intelligent, responsible, hardworking, and respectful. Unlike many young men of his age, he was not interested in showing off wealth or chasing attention. He was focused on building a meaningful life. When he arrived on campus, Bidemi welcomed him warmly. As they chatted, Albert casually asked, "Where is this famous Joy I've been hearing about all these years?" Bidemi laughed. "You finally want to meet her?" "Of course," Albert replied. "I feel like I know her already." Later that afternoon, Bidemi took Albert to meet Joy. The meeting was simple. No dramatic music. No grand romantic moment. Just two intelligent young people greeting each other. Yet something clicked immediately. They found conversation surprisingly easy. Albert was impressed by Joy's humility despite her academic brilliance. Joy was impressed by Albert's calm maturity and respectful manner. After that visit, communication began. Occasional phone calls. Friendly messages. Conversations about studies. Conversations about work. Conversations about life. Slowly, a genuine friendship formed. And as the months passed, that friendship deepened. Joy eventually completed her medical degree. The journey had not been easy. There had been sleepless nights. Endless examinations. Clinical postings. Practical assessments. Financial challenges. Moments of exhaustion. Moments of doubt. But she persevered. Just as she always had. After graduation came her housemanship. Then her National Youth Service Corps program. Throughout it all, she continued to excel. Whenever challenges appeared, she approached them the same way she had approached every challenge since childhood. With discipline. With determination. With excellence. When her NYSC ended, she secured employment at Western Hospital, a respected private healthcare facility. For the first time in her life, Joy began earning a professional salary. The feeling was incredible. But instead of focusing solely on herself, she immediately began helping the people who had sacrificed for her. Her mother. Her sisters. The family that had stood by her through years of hardship. Every month, part of her salary went toward supporting Kemi. Another portion went toward helping Mitchel and Sarah complete their own tertiary education. The burden Kemi had carried alone for years was finally becoming lighter. Sometimes Kemi would watch her daughter and silently wipe tears from her eyes. The little girl she had struggled to raise had become a doctor. The daughter whom Femi had dismissed had become the family's greatest source of support. Life had a way of surprising people. As Joy's professional life blossomed, so did her relationship with Albert. The friendship they had built over the years evolved naturally into something deeper. Albert admired her intelligence. Her kindness. Her humility. Her strength. Joy admired his maturity. His consistency. his honesty, his respect for family. Neither of them believed in rushing relationships. They took their time, got to know each other properly, built trust, built friendship, built understanding. Eventually, Albert proposed. Joy accepted. The families were delighted. Wedding preparations began almost immediately. Albert was excited. Extremely excited. For years he had watched Joy grow into an exceptional woman. Now he was preparing to spend the rest of his life with her. Dates were discussed. Venues were inspected. Guest lists were drafted. Plans moved steadily forward. Yet amidst all the excitement, one issue troubled Joy deeply. Her father. No matter what had happened between them, she wanted him to know. She wanted him to have the opportunity to participate. She wanted him to attend. She wanted him to see the woman she had become. Together, she and Kemi tried repeatedly to contact him. The old phone number was no longer active. Calls would not connect. Messages went unanswered. Nobody knew his exact address. He had already retired from the company where Kemi had always known him to work. It was as though he had vanished. Eventually, Kemi decided to visit Femi's family house. Perhaps someone there would know how to reach him. Fortunately, Femi's younger brother, Matthew, was around. Matthew welcomed Kemi respectfully. After hearing the reason for her visit, he nodded. Actually, he said, I have Femi's current phone number. Kemi felt relieved immediately. Without wasting time, Matthew dialed the number. The call connected. After exchanging greetings, Matthew got straight to the point. Brother, Kemi and Joy have been looking for you. Silence. Matthew continued. Joy is preparing for her wedding. Another pause. They want to involve you. Several moments passed before Femi finally spoke. Okay. His voice sounded distant. I've taken note. Matthew waited. I will get back to Joy and her mother. The call ended shortly afterward. Kemi thanked Matthew sincerely. Then she returned home. That evening she informed Joy about the conversation. Joy felt hopeful. Perhaps her father would finally reconnect. Perhaps he would attend the wedding. Perhaps years of distance could begin to heal. But neither Joy nor Kemi knew that at that exact moment, another person had also heard every word of Matthew's phone conversation. Mirabel. And what she would do next would change everything. At Femi's apartment, Mirabel was sitting comfortably on the living room sofa when Matthew's call came through. After the call ended, Mirabel slowly turned toward him. You shouldn't go, she said firmly. Femi looked surprised. Why? He asked. Mirabel shook her head. You can be embarrassed there. You don't know what Kemi and her daughters are planning. For all you know, they may use the occasion to insult you publicly. Femi frowned. I don't think they would do that. How do you know? Mirabel countered. You haven't lived with them for years. Besides, what exactly are you going there to do? They have managed all this time without you. Femi remained silent. Mirabel moved closer. My advice is simple. Let your younger brother represent you. Don't even create an opportunity for you and Kemi or those girls to sit down and start discussing old issues. Her words gradually sank into Femi's mind. The next day, he called Matthew. I won't be participating in the wedding, he said. Please represent me. Matthew was disappointed. Are you sure about this? Yes. Matthew sighed. Very well. When Matthew informed Kemi and Joy, they were saddened. Joy had not expected her father to suddenly become affectionate after years of absence. Still, a part of her had hoped that her wedding day would be important enough to bring him back into their lives. Apparently, it was not. She quietly accepted the disappointment and focused on the preparations. Months of planning eventually came together. The wedding between Joy and Albert was beautiful. Family members gathered. Friends rejoiced. Bidemi was there, smiling proudly as she watched her best friend begin a new chapter of life. Kemi shed tears of joy as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. The absence of Femi created a visible gap, but the celebration continued. Albert was a loving husband, and everyone could see how much he respected Joy. For the first time in many years, Kemi felt that one of her children had entered a season of genuine happiness. After the wedding, Joy continued pursuing her professional goals. She was determined to become a specialist physician. Her years of discipline and academic excellence once again paid off. She secured admission into a residency program in cardiology, the branch of medicine that focuses on diseases of the heart and blood vessels. The training was demanding. There were sleepless nights, long hospital shifts, emergency calls, difficult examinations. Yet Joy persevered. Just as she had topped classes in secondary school and excelled in medical school, she distinguished herself during residency. Several years later, she completed her specialist training and officially became a consultant cardiologist. She was subsequently employed by Triple Crown Cardio Hospital, one of the most respected healthcare hospitals in the region. Her reputation quickly grew. Patients appreciated her intelligence. Colleagues admired her professionalism. Hospital administrators valued her dedication. Meanwhile, life continued for Femi and Mirabel. The years passed. Nolan grew older. Sophia also blossomed into a cheerful young girl. Femi remained deeply attached to Nolan. As far as Femi was concerned, all the sacrifices he had made over the years had been worth it because he finally had a male child carrying his name. What he did not know was that life was quietly preparing a lesson he would never forget. A lesson that would force him to confront every decision he had made. A lesson that would eventually lead him back to the family he had abandoned. And when that day arrived, the daughter he had rejected would become the very person standing between him and death. The years continued to roll by. Nolan was no longer the little boy Femi once carried proudly on his shoulders. He had grown into a handsome young man and had recently secured admission into a university. Femi was overjoyed. To him, Nolan's admission was another confirmation that his dreams had finally come true. He had always imagined having a son who would carry on his legacy, and now that son was preparing to begin higher education. As part of the admission requirements, Nolan was expected to undergo a series of medical examinations before resumption. The university had its own clinic where students could complete the test. However, students were also permitted to conduct the medical examinations at any government-approved laboratory and submit the results afterward. Femi cared deeply about Nolan. He always wanted him to be ahead of every process. He wanted everything done quickly and properly. One Saturday morning, Mirabel left the house early for a social event. After she departed, Femi called Nolan into the sitting room. "Nolan," he said, handing him some money, "instead of waiting for queues at the university clinic, go to a reputable laboratory today and do your medical test." "Okay, Dad," Nolan replied. Within minutes, he left the house. Femi spent the morning relaxing at home. A little over 3 hours later, Nolan returned. "Dad, I'm back," he announced. The laboratory had been unusually fast. He handed the envelope containing his results to his father. Femi casually opened it. At first, he was simply reviewing the report to ensure everything was in order. Then suddenly, his eyes froze. His expression changed. He looked at one particular line on the document. Blood genotype, AS. Femi blinked. Then he read it again. Blood genotype, AS. His heart skipped a beat. He sat upright. For several seconds, he stared at the paper. Something was not right. Femi knew his own genotype. Years ago, During a medical screening at Suprema Company, he had been tested. His genotype was A. He also remembered that Mirabel had undergone genotype testing during one of her pregnancies. The result had also been A. If both parents were A, how could their child be AS? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. Perhaps there had been a laboratory error. Perhaps the result belonged to another person. Perhaps there was some medical explanation he did not understand. Yet the uncomfortable feeling refused to leave him. His eyes slowly drifted toward Sophia, who was seated in a corner of the living room watching cartoons. The little girl smiled innocently when she noticed her father looking at her. Femi forced a smile back. But inside, his mind was racing. An hour later, he called Sophia. "Come with me," he said. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked. "Just somewhere nearby." He drove her to another laboratory. There, he quietly requested a genotype test. Sophia happily cooperated, unaware of why the test was being conducted. After some waiting, the result was released. Femi opened the report immediately. Blood genotype, A. He stared at it. A. Exactly what he expected. Sophia's result aligned perfectly with his own genotype and what he believed to be Mirabel's genotype. But Nolan's result did not. The contradiction troubled him deeply. As they drove home, countless thoughts flooded his mind. He tried to dismiss them. He tried to convince himself there was a simple explanation. Yet a disturbing question kept returning. How could an AA father and an AA mother produce an AS child? By the time he arrived home, his hands were trembling slightly. For the first time in many years, fear had entered his heart. And although he did not yet know it, that single laboratory result had just opened the door to a secret that would destroy everything he believed about his life. The genotype result continued to torment Femi throughout the day. He tried to focus on other things, but his mind kept returning to the same troubling question. How could Nolan be AS? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that something was terribly wrong. Before Mirabel returned from her social event that evening, Femi made a decision. He called Nolan and Sophia. "Get ready," he said. "Where are we going, Dad?" Nolan asked. "Just a laboratory. There is a family test I want us to do." Neither child suspected anything. They followed him without asking further questions. At the laboratory, Femi quietly requested DNA tests for himself, Nolan, and Sophia. The laboratory staff collected the required samples. Neither Nolan nor Sophia was informed of the exact nature of the test. Femi simply smiled and reassured them. "It is just a routine family test. Nothing serious." The children accepted the explanation. After the samples were collected, the laboratory informed him that the results would be ready in 2 weeks. The waiting period felt endless. That night, Mirabel returned home. She noticed that Femi was unusually quiet. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," Femi replied calmly. He did not mention the genotype issue. He did not mention the DNA test. He did not confront her. Instead, he chose to wait. For the next 2 weeks, he behaved as normally as possible. He went about his routine. He spoke to Mirabel as usual. He interacted with Nolan and Sophia as he always had. But beneath the surface, anxiety was eating him alive. Every day felt heavier than the previous one. Finally, the day arrived. Femi drove alone to the laboratory. His heart pounded as he entered the building. The receptionist handed him a sealed envelope. He thanked her and sat down in the waiting area. For several moments, he simply stared at the envelope. Then, with trembling hands, he opened it. His eyes moved quickly through the pages. The first result concerned Sophia. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Femi released a small breath. Sophia was his biological daughter. There was no doubt about it. Then he turned to Nolan's result. The moment his eyes landed on the conclusion, the world around him seemed to stop. Probability of paternity, excluded. Femi blinked repeatedly. Surely he had read it incorrectly. He read it again. And then again. The words remained unchanged. He was not Nolan's biological father. The boy he had adored. The boy he had sacrificed everything for. The boy he had proudly called his heir. The boy for whom he had abandoned his wife and daughters. The boy was not his son. The document slipped from his hands. A sharp pain shot through his chest. The room began to spin. The walls appeared to move. Voices became distant. Then everything went black. Femi collapsed. Panic erupted inside the laboratory. Staff rushed toward him. Medical personnel attended to him immediately. He was resuscitated and stabilized. Several hours later, after receiving treatment and regaining consciousness, he sat silently in a recovery room. Tears streamed down his face. When he eventually left the clinic, he drove home in silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The DNA results lay on the passenger seat beside him. By the time he reached the house, anger, grief, betrayal, and regret were raging inside him. Mirabel was seated in the living room when he entered. She immediately sensed something was wrong. "Femi, what happened?" she asked. Without saying a word, he threw the laboratory report onto the table. Mirabel glanced at the documents. The color instantly drained from her face. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Femi exploded. "What is this?" he shouted. His voice shook the entire house. Mirabel stared at the floor. "Answer me." The shouting attracted Nolan and Sophia. Femi ordered them into their rooms. The children quickly obeyed. Once they were gone, all restraint disappeared. The confrontation became fierce. Accusations flew across the room. Years of buried emotions erupted. Femi demanded answers. Mirabel initially denied everything. Then she blamed the laboratory. Then she claimed there had been a mistake. But the evidence was undeniable. Finally, after hours of pressure, her resistance collapsed. She broke down and confessed. The truth was even more devastating than Femi had imagined. Nolan belonged to another man. His name was Samson. He lived in the United States. Before meeting Femi, Mirabel and Samson had been deeply involved romantically. They had hoped to get married. However, Samson had secured an opportunity abroad and traveled to America. The month he left Nigeria happened to be the same month Mirabel encountered Femi. What Femi never knew was that Mirabel was already pregnant before Samson departed. She had been approximately 2 weeks pregnant at the time. She discovered the pregnancy shortly after Samson left. Instead of revealing the truth, she kept silent. When Femi became excited about the pregnancy and convinced that he was finally going to have a son, she allowed him to believe the child belonged to him. Year after year, the lie continued. And with each passing year, it became more difficult to tell the truth. By the time Nolan was born, Femi had become completely attached to the boy. Mirabel simply continued the deception. When the confession ended, silence filled the room. Femi sat motionless. His entire life seemed to have collapsed around him. The son for whom he had abandoned his family was not his son. The wife who had remained faithful had been discarded. The daughters he had rejected had grown into successful women without him. The years he had wasted could never be recovered. For the first time in his life, Femi fully understood the cost of his choices. And deep inside, he knew that the greatest punishment was not the betrayal itself. It was realizing that he had betrayed the people who had loved him most. The house was unusually quiet. Mirabel had locked herself in the bedroom. Sophia was asleep. Nolan was in his room, completely unaware of the storm raging around him. Femi stared at the wall. Then suddenly he remembered Joy. The daughter he had rejected. The daughter who had called him years ago for help with her examination fees. The daughter he had insulted. The daughter who had become a doctor without his help. For the first time in years, tears rolled down his cheeks. Not because Nolan was not his son, but because he finally understood what he had done. He had thrown away diamonds while searching for gold. And now he had neither. The DNA results destroyed more than Femi's relationship with Mirabel. They destroyed the very foundation upon which he had built the last 7 years of his life. For days after the confrontation, Femi could hardly sleep. He would sit alone in his living room long after midnight, staring into darkness. The television would be on. But he would not be watching. Food would be on the table. But he would not be eating. His mind replayed the same questions repeatedly. How could this have happened? How had he been so blind? How had he thrown away his family for a lie? How had he abandoned 3 daughters who loved him? How had he betrayed a wife who had stood by him through years of hardship? The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. Finally, one evening, the tension exploded. He ordered Mirabel into the sitting room. The DNA report lay on the table between them. His hands trembled. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice cracked with pain. Leave. Mirabel stared at him. What? Leave my house? Mirabel folded her arms. Femi. I said leave. The shout echoed through the apartment. Sophia began crying in the next room. Nolan emerged from his bedroom looking confused. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Femi pointed toward the door. I don't want to see you again. Mirabel realized there was no turning back. The relationship was over. The secret was out. The illusion had shattered. Within days she packed her belongings. She left with both Nolan and Sophia. As their vehicle disappeared down the street, Femi stood alone at the gate. For years he had believed he was building a better life. Now he stood with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Loneliness became Femi's constant companion. The apartment felt empty. Silent. Cold. The laughter of children was gone. The sounds of conversation were gone. Even the arguments were gone. All that remained was silence. And regret. The weight of his mistakes began affecting his health. His blood pressure rose dangerously. He developed persistent headaches. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night struggling to breathe. This is the end of the first part of the story. Other times his chest would tighten unexpectedly. Her education. His doctors prescribed medications. Was able to overcome the numerous challenges she was facing. Treatments. How about the love affair between Femi and Mirabel? Yet his condition continued worsening. How about Nolan? After reviewing the answers to all of these and many more are in the second part of this story. Mr. Watch Femi, out for part 2 of the father's regret. We can hear. Don't Femi miss it. Swallowed nervously. What do you mean? You need specialist care. The doctor paused. A cardiologist. Femi nodded weakly. His heart was failing him. Just as he had failed those who loved him. The referral letter directed him to Triple Crown Cardio Hospital. One of the most respected cardiac hospitals in the region. When Femi arrived, he was shocked by the cost. The admission deposit alone was 500,000 naira. He left that day. But his symptoms worsened. By the next morning, he had no choice. He returned. Paid the money. Completed registration. Then took a seat among dozens of waiting patients. The waiting room was crowded. Men. Women. Young. Old. Everyone waiting patiently for the specialist. The nurses repeatedly apologized. The cardiologist is attending an emergency case. Hours passed. 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock. Then noon. Finally, movement occurred near the entrance. Nurses suddenly became more alert. Junior doctors stood respectfully. Patients looked up. Someone important had arrived. The cardiologist entered. Femi looked casually. Then froze. His heart nearly stopped. It was Joy. Dr. Joy Albert. Consultant cardiologist. His daughter. The daughter he had rejected. The daughter he had refused to educate. The daughter whose wedding he had ignored. The daughter he had abandoned. For several seconds the entire world seemed to stop. Femi stared. Joy noticed him immediately. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The room remained silent. Finally Femi managed to whisper. Joy. His voice broke. My daughter. Several patients turned toward him curiously. Joy's expression remained professional. Calm. Controlled. Without saying a word, she continued walking. She entered her consulting office and began seeing patients one after another. Femi remained frozen. Shame flooded his entire body. He could not bear it. The realization crushed him. The daughter he once considered worthless had become a specialist doctor. The daughter he had neglected was now the person capable of saving his life. Quietly, before his name was called, Femi stood up. Then he left. Back home, his condition worsened. Days passed. Then weeks. He barely slept. He barely ate. His blood pressure continued climbing. Each morning he feared might be his last. One evening he sat alone in darkness. No television. No music. No distractions. Just himself. And his thoughts. For the first time in his life, Femi stopped blaming everybody else. He stopped blaming Kemi. He stopped blaming fate. He stopped blaming circumstances. Instead, he confronted the truth. The problem had been him. His pride. His prejudice. His obsession with having a son. His inability to appreciate what he already had. The realization hurt. But it also brought clarity. At last he knew what he needed to do. The next morning, Femi began searching for Kemi. Eventually he found her. Time had changed her. But the kindness in her eyes remained. When Kemi opened the door and saw him, she stood speechless. Femi immediately fell to his knees. Kemi. Tears streamed down his face. I have wronged you. Years of pain suddenly resurfaced. Yet Kemi listened quietly. Patiently. As she always had. For over an hour, Femi spoke. He narrated everything. The DNA results. The betrayal. The collapse of his relationship with Mirabel. The loneliness. The illness. The regret. When he finished, silence filled the room. Finally Kemi spoke. What do you want from me? Femi lowered his head. Forgiveness. His voice trembled. And help me reach my daughters. Days later, the entire family gathered. Joy. Mitchel. Sarah. Kemi. And Femi. The atmosphere was emotional. Heavy. Awkward. Femi apologized repeatedly. Not because he wanted anything, but because he genuinely understood the damage he had caused. Then Joy spoke. Daddy, there is something I need to tell you. Femi nodded. Joy continued. The gender of a child is determined by the father, not the mother. Silence followed. The mother's chromosome is always X. She smiled gently. The father contributes either X or Y. Femi lowered his eyes. Years of resentment suddenly appeared even more foolish. He had blamed Kemi for something that had never been her responsibility. He had punished innocent daughters because of his own ignorance. Tears filled his eyes again. I know. His voice cracked. And I am ashamed. He looked at Joy. When I saw you walk into that hospital. He paused. Emotion overwhelmed him. The respect people gave you. The confidence. The dignity. The excellence. He shook his head. That was the moment I understood. Everyone listened quietly. It is not sons alone who have potential. Daughters have potential too. Daughters can become leaders. Daughters can become doctors. Daughters can become blessings. He sighed deeply. I wasted years learning a lesson I should have known from the beginning. The family forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because forgiveness frees the wounded. Joy personally supervised his cardiac treatment. She adjusted medications, monitored his recovery. Gradually, Femi improved. His blood pressure stabilized. His health returned. His smile slowly returned. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. One evening, while the family sat together laughing, Joy spoke. Daddy. Femi looked up. Have you considered finding Sophia? The room became quiet. Joy continued gently. She is innocent in all this. Mitchel nodded. Sarah agreed. If she ever needs family, we can be family. Femi sat silently for several moments. Then he shook his head. No. Everyone looked surprised. I have no hatred for Sophia. His voice remained calm. If one day she finds me, I will do my duty as her father. He paused. But I don't want anything that reconnects me to Mirabel. The room remained silent. Femi looked around at Kemi. At Joy. At Mitchel. At Sarah. Then smiled. I spent years searching for happiness elsewhere. His eyes became moist. Only to discover it had been here all along. For the first time in many years, the family sat together peacefully. A family once broken. A family once abandoned. A family once divided by pride. Now reunited by forgiveness. And as Femi looked at his daughters laughing together, he finally understood a truth that would remain with him for the rest of his life. After recovering, Femi was invited by Kemi and his daughters to come and live with them. However, he quietly declined. The house where Kemi now lived had been bought by Joy from her earnings as a cardiologist. Every time Femi looked around the beautiful home, he was reminded that it was the daughter he had rejected who had made such comfort possible. The thought filled him with shame. One evening, he spoke softly to Joy. My daughter, I am deeply grateful for everything you have done for me. But I don't think I can live in this house. It belongs to you and your mother. Every corner reminds me of the mistakes I made. Please allow me to continue living in my rented apartment. I believe that is where I can reflect on my past and live the rest of my life in humility. Joy looked at her father with compassion. Dad, she replied, what matters most is that you have changed. If living in your apartment gives you peace of mind, we will respect your decision. But from today, you will never lack anything again. I will take care of your house rent, your medical bills, and whatever else you need. You are still our father, and we will fulfill our responsibilities with love. Tears rolled down Femi's cheeks. He had abandoned his daughters because they were girls, yet they had become his greatest source of comfort, dignity, and hope. From that day forward, Femi lived quietly in his apartment, maintaining a close relationship with Kemi, Joy, Mitchel, and Toyin. He visited them often, attended family gatherings, celebrated their achievements, and devoted himself to rebuilding the years he had lost. Although he could never erase the pain of the past, he spent the rest of his life proving through his actions that genuine repentance is demonstrated by consistent change. The experience transformed his outlook forever. Whenever he met young couples or expectant fathers, he would share his story and caution them never to value one child above another simply because of gender. He would often say, The greatest mistake of my life was believing that only a son could make me proud. My daughters became my greatest blessing. Every child deserves equal love, care, and opportunity regardless of gender.